Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Chapter 3. The author sent to the court, the queen buys him of his master and the farmer, and presents him to the king. He disputes with his majesty's great scholars. An apartment at court provided for the author. He is in high favor with the queen. He stands up for the honor of his own country. His quarrels with the queen's dwarf. The frequent labors I underwent every day made in a few weeks a very considerable change in my health. The more my master got by me, the more unsatiable he grew. I'd quite lost my stomach, and was almost reduced to a skeleton. The farmer observed it, and concluding I must die, resolving to make as good a hand of me as he could. While he was thus reasoning and resolving with himself, a slardral, or gentleman usher, came from court, commanding my master to carry me immediately thither for the diversion of the queen and her ladies. Some of the latter had already been seen to me, and reported strange things about my beauty, behaviour, and good sense. Her Majesty and those who attended her were beyond measure delighted with my demeanour. I fell on my knees, and begged the honour of kissing her imperial foot. But this gracious princess held out her finger towards me, and after I was set on a table, which I embraced in both my arms, and put the tip of it, with the utmost respect, to my lip, she made me some general questions about my country and my travels, which I had answered as distinctly and as in a few words as I could. She asked whether I would be content to live at court. I bowed down to the board of the table, and humbly answered that I was my master's slave, but if I were at my own disposal, I should be proud to devote my life to her Majesty's servant. Then she asked my master whether he were willing to sell me at a good price. He, who apprehended I could not live a month, was ready enough to part with me, and demanded 1,000 pieces of gold, which were ordered him on the spot, each piece about the bigness of 800 mortars. But, allowing for the proportions of all things between that country and Europe, and the high price of gold among them, was hardly so great a sum as thousands of guineas would be in England. I then said to the queen that I was now her Majesty's most humble creature and vassal. I must beg the favour that Glumdalclitch, who had always tended me with so much care and kindness, and understood to do it so well, might be admitted to her service, and continue to be my nurse and instructor. Her Majesty agreed to my petition, and easily got the farmer's consent, who was glad enough to have his daughter preferred at court. The poor girl herself was not able to hide her joy. My late master withdrew, bidding me farewell, saying that he had only left me in a good service, to which I replied not a word, only making him a slight bow. The queen observed my coldness, and when the farmer was gone out of the apartment, asked me the reason. I made bold to tell her that I owe no other obligation to my late master than his not dashing out the brains of a poor harmless creature found by chance in his field, which obligation was amply recompensed by the gain he had made me in shewing me through half the kingdom, and the price he had now sold for me for, that the life I had since led was laborious enough to kill an animal of 10 times my strength, that my health was much impaired by the continual drudgery of entertaining the rabble every hour of the day, and that if my master had not thought about my life in danger, her Majesty, perhaps, would not have got so cheap a bargain. But I was all out of fear of being ill-treated under protection of so great and good an empress, the ornament of nature, the darling of the world, the delight of her subjects, the phoenix of the creation. So, I hoped my late master's apprehensions would appear to be groundless, for I already found my spirits to revive and influence most of her august presence. This was the sum of my speech, delivered with great improprieties and hesitation. The latter part was altogether framed in the style particular to that people, whereof I learned some phrases from Glumdalclitch while she was carrying me to court, the Queen giving a great allowance for my defectiveness in speaking. However, surprised at so much wit and good sense in so diminutive an animal, she took me in her own hands, and carried me to the king, who was then retired to his cabinet. His Majesty, a prince of much gravity and austere countenance, not well observing my shape at first view, and asked the Queen after a cold manner how long it was since that she grew fond of a splatnook. For such it seemed he took me to be, as I laid upon my breast in her Majesty's right hand. But this princess, who hath an infinite deal of wit and humour, set me gently on my feet in scrutore, and commanded me to give his Majesty an account of myself, which I did in a very few words, and Glumdalclitch, who attended at the cabinet door, could not ensure I would be out of her sight. Being admitted, confirmed all that is past from my arrival from my father's house. The king, although he be as learned a person as any of his dominions, and had been educated in the study of philosophy, and particularly mathematics, which yet he observed my shape exactly when he saw me walk direct, before I began to speak, conceived I might be a piece of clockwork, which is in that country arrived to be a great perfection, contrived by some ingenious artist. But when he heard my voice, found what I delivered to be irregular and rational, he could not conceal his astonishment. He was by no means satisfied with the relation I gave him of the manner I came to his kingdom. But though it a short story concerted between Glumdalclitch and her father, who had taught me a set of words to make me sell at a higher price. Upon this imagination, he put several other questions to me, and still received rational answers, no otherwise defective by the foreign language, and an imperfect knowledge in the language, with some rustic phrases which I had learned at the farmer house, which did not suit the polite style of a court. His Majesty sent for his three great scholars, who were then in their weekly waiting, according to the custom in that country. These gentlemen, after they were a while examined my shape with much nicety, they were all different opinions concerning me. They all agreed that I could not be produced according to the regular laws of nature, but I was not framed with a capacity of preserving my life by either swiftness or climbing of trees, or digging holes in the earth. They observed by my teeth, and they viewed with great exactness, that I was a carnivorous animal, yet both quadrupeds being an overmatch for me, and field mice, with some others, too nimble, that they could imagine how I should be able to support myself, unless I fed upon snails and other insects, which they offered by many learned arguments to convince that I could not possibly do one of these virtues to seem to think that I might be an embryo, or abortive birth. But this opinion was rejected by another two, who observed my limbs to be perfect and finished, that I had lived several years, and I was manifested from my beard, the stumps whereof they plainly discovered through a magnifying glass. They would not allow me to be a dwarf, because my littleness was beyond all degrees comparison. The queen's favourite dwarf, the smallest ever known in that kingdom, was nearly 30 foot high, Reclam Scalath, which is interpreted literally as lustrous nature, a determination exactly agreeable to the modern philosophy of Europe, whose professors, detaining the old evasions of the occult, whereby the followers of Aristotle endeavour in vain to disguise their ignorance, have invented this wonderful solution of all difficulties to the unspeakable advancement of the human knowledge. After this decisive conclusion, I entreated to be shared a word or two. I applied myself to the king, and assured his majesty that I came from a country which abounded with several millions of both sexes, and of my own stature, where the animals, trees, and houses were all in proportion, and where by consequence I might be able to defend myself, to find sustenance, to any of his majesty's subjects could do here, which I took for a full answer to those gentlemen's arguments. To this they only replied with a smile of contempt, saying that this farmer had instructed me very well in my lesson. The king, who had much better understanding, dismissed his learned men, sent for the farmer, who, by a very good fortune, was not yet gone out of town. Having therefore first examined him privately, then confronted him with me and the young girl, his majesty began to think that what we told him might possibly be true. He desired the queen to order that a particular care should be taken of me, and was the opinion that Glumdalclitch should still continue in her office of tending me, because he observed we had a great affection of each other, and the convenient apartment was provided for her at court. She had a sort of governess appointed to take care of her education, a maid to dress her, and 2 other services for menial offices. But the care of me was wholly appropriated to herself. The queen commanded her own cabinet maker to contrive a box that might serve me for a bedchamber, after the model that Glumdalclitch and I should agree upon. This man was a most ingenious artist, and, according to my directions, in 3 weeks finished for me a wooden chamber of 16 foot square, 12 high, with a sash of windows, a door, with 2 closets, like a London bedchamber. The board that made the ceiling was to be lifted up and down by 2 hinges, to put in a bed ready furnished by her majesty's upholster, which Glumdalclitch took out every night to air, made it with her own hands, letting down at night, locked up the roof for me. A nice workman, who was famous for little curiosities, undertook me to make me 2 chairs, with backs and frames of a substance not unlike ivory, and 2 tables, with a cabinet to put my things in. The room was quilted on all sides, as well as the floor and the ceiling, to prevent any accident from a carelessness who those who carried me, and to break the force of a jolt when I went into a coach. I desired a lock for my door to prevent rats and mice from coming in. The smith, after several attempts, made the smallest that was ever seen among them, for I have known a larger at the gates at the gentleman's house in England. I made a shift to keep a key in my pocket of my own, fearing that Glumdalclitch might lose it. The Queen likewise ordered the thinnest silks that could ever be gotten to make me clothes, not much thicker than an English blanket, very cumbersome till I was accustomed to them. They were after the fashion of the kingdom, partly resembling Persian and partly the Chinese, in which are very grave decent habit. The Queen became so fond of my company that she could not dine without me. I had a table placed upon the same which I let her Majesty eat, just at her left elbow, and the chair to sit on. Glumdalclitch stood upon a stool on the floor, near my table, to assist and take care of me. I had an entire set of silver dishes and plates, and other necessities, which in the proportion to those of the Queen, were not much bigger than what I have seen from the same kind of a London toy shop. For the furniture of a baby house, these my little nurse kept in her pocket, in a silver box that gave me at meals as I wanted them, always cleaning them herself. No person dined with the Queen but with the princesses royal, the the elder 16-year-old, and the younger, at the time 13 and a month. Her Majesty used to put a bit of meat upon one of my dishes, out of which I carved for myself. But her diversion was to see me eat in miniature. For the Queen, who indeed but a weak stomach, took up at one mouthful as much as dozen English farmers could eat at a meal, which to me was some time a very nauseous sight. She would crotch the wing of a lark, bones and all, between her teeth, although it was 9 times as large as that of a full-grown turkey, and put in the bitter bread in her mouth, as 2 12-penny loaves. She drank out of her golden cup, above, above a hogshead at draught. Her knives were as twice as long as a scythe, set straight upon the handle. The spoons, forks, and other instruments were all in the same proportion. I remember when Glumdalclitch carried me out of curiosity to see some of the tables at court, where 10 or a dozen of these knives and forks were lifted up together. I thought that I had never till beheld so terrible a sight. It is the custom that every Wednesday, which I have before observed, was their Sabbath. The King and the Queen, with their royal issue of both sexes, dined together in the apartment of his Majesty, who to whom I was now becoming a great favourite, and at these times my little chair and table were placed at the left of his hand, before one of the salt cellars. This prince took a pleasure in conversing with me, acquiring into the manners, religions, laws, and governments, and learning of Europe, wherein I gave him the best account I was able. His apprehension was so clear, and his judgment so exact, that he made very wise reflections and observations upon all I said. But I confess that after a little I became too copious in talking about my own beloved country, our trade, and wars by sea and land, of our skimmed and religioned. The parties in the state, the prejudices in his education, prevailed so far that he could not forbear taking me up in his right hand, and stroking me gently with the other. After a hearty fit laughing, he asked me whether I was a Whig or a Tory, but then turning to his first minister, who waited behind him, with his white staff, near as tall as the mainmast of a royal sovereign, he observed how contemptible a thing was human grandeur, and could be mimicked with such diminutive insects as one eye. And yet said he, I dare engage. These creatures have their titles and distinctions of honor. They contrive little nests and burrows, which they call house and cities, and make a figure and dress the equipage. They love, they fight, they dispute, they cheat, they betray. And thus he continued on, while my colour came with several times, in indignation to hear our noble country, the mistress of arms and arts, the scourge of France, the arbitress of Europe, the seat of virtue, pity, honour, and truth, the pride and envy of a world so contemptuously treated. But as I was not in a condition to resent injuries, so, upon mature thoughts, I began to doubt whether I was injured or no. For, after having been accustomed several months to the sight and converse of this people, and observed every object upon which I cast my eyes to be of proportional magnitude, the horror I had first conceived from their bulk and aspect was so far worn off, that if I had then beheld a company of the English lords and ladies in their finery and birthday clothes, acting in their several parts in the most courtly manner of strutting, bowing, and prating, to say the truth, I would have strongly tempted to laugh as much as them as this king and his grandees did at me. Neither, indeed, could I forbear them smiling at myself, when the queen used to place me upon her hand towards the looking-glass, by which both of our persons appeared before me in full view together, that there could be nothing be more ridiculous than the comparisons, so that I could really begin to imagine myself dwindled many degrees below my usual size. Nothing angered and mortified me so much as the queen's dwarf, who being of the lowest stature that was ever in the country, for I verily think he was not 30 foot high, became insolent at seeing a creature so much beneath him, that he would always affect to swagger and look big as he passed by me in the queen's antechamber. While I was standing on some table talking with the lords or ladies of the court, and he seldom failed of a revenge myself by calling him brother, challenging him to wrestle, and such repartees are usual in the mouth of the court pages. One day, at dinner, this malicious little cub was so nettled with something I had said to him, that raising himself upon a frame of her Majesty's chair, he took me up by the middle, as I was sitting down, not thinking any harm, and letting me drop into a silver bowl of cream, then ran away as fast as he could. I fell over head and ears, and, if I had not been a good swimmer, it might have gone very hard with me, for Glumdalclitch in that instant happened to be at the other end of the room, and the queen was in such a fright that she wanted presence of mind to assist me. But my little nurse ran to my relief, took me out. After I swallowed a quart of cream, I was put to bed. However, I received no other damage than the loss of a suit of clothes. I was utterly spoiled. The dwarf sound whipped, and as a further punishment, forced to drink up the bowl of cream, into which he had thrown me. Neither was he ever restored to a favour, for soon after the queen bestowed to a lady of high quality, so that I saw him no more. To my very great satisfaction, I could not tell to what extremity such malicious urchin might have carried his resentment. He had before served me a scurvy trick, which set the queen a laughing, although at the same time she were heartily vexed, and would have immediately cashiered him, and if I had not been so generous to intercede, Her Majesty had taken a marrow bone upon her plate, after knocking out the marrow, placed the bone in the dish erect as it stood before. The dwarf, watching his opportunity, while Glumdalclitch was gone to the sideboard, mounted up the stool she stood on to take care of me at meals, took me up in both hands, squeezing my legs together, wedged them into the marrow bone above my waist, where I stuck for some time, and made a very ridiculous figure. I believe it was near a minute before anyone knew what had become of me, for I thought it below me to cry out. But, as princes seldom get their meal hot, my legs were not scalded, only my stockings and breeches in sad condition. The dwarf, at my entreaty, had no other punishment than a sound whipping. I was frequently rallied by the Queen upon account of my fearfulness. She used to ask me whether the people of my country were great cowards as myself. The occasion was this: the kingdom is much pestered with flies in the summer, and these odious insects, each of them as big as a dumb-stable lark, hardly gave me any rest while I sat at dinner. With their continual humming and buzzing around my ears, they would sometimes alight upon my victuals, and leave their loathsome excrement or spawn behind, which to me was very visible, though not to the natives of that country, whose large optics were not so acute as mine in viewing smaller objects. Sometimes they would fix upon my nose or forehead, where they stung me to the quick, smelling very offensively, and I could easily trace that vicious matter, for our naturalists tell us it enables those creatures to walk on their feet, upwards, upon a ceiling. I had much ado to defend myself against these detestable animals, and I could not forbear starting when they came on my face. It was the common practice of the dwarf to catch a number of these insects in his hands, as schoolboys do among us, and let them out suddenly under my nose on purpose to frighten me, and divert the Queen. The remedy was to cut them in pieces with my knife as they flew in the air, wherein my dexterity was much admired. I remember one morning, when Glumdalclitch had set me in my box upon a window. She usually did in the fair days to give me air, for I durst not venture to let the box be hung on a nail out of the window, as we do with cages in England. After I had lifted up one of these sashes, and sat down at my table to eat a piece of sweet-smelling cake for my breakfast, above 20 wasps, allured by the smell, came flying into the room, humming louder than the drones as many bagpipes. Some of them seized my cake, carried it piecemeal away. Others flew about my head, confounding me with the noise, putting me in the utmost terror of their stings. However, I had the courage to rise and draw my hanger, and attack them in the air. I dispatched 4 of them, and the rest got away, and I presently shut my window. These insects were as large as a partridge. I took out their stings, found them an inch and a half long, as sharp as needles. I carefully preserved them all, and since shewn them in other curiosities in several parts of Europe. Upon my return to England, I gave 3 of them to Gresham College, and kept the 4th to myself.